Hi, and welcome to a special 2022 election edition of Newsmakers. I'm Jerry Roberts. It is Thursday, April 21st, and I am very pleased and honored to welcome our guest today, Susan Salcido, who is running for re-election as Santa Barbara County Superintendent of Schools. Welcome, Superintendent, and thank you so much for taking the time to talk to Newsmakers today.
Thank you so much for the invitation. Really appreciate it.
I'm going to just say a word here about your background for those who don't know who you are. You grew up in Santa Maria, attended public schools, earned your BA and a master's in education at UCSB, and in 2018, PhD from USC's School of Education. Superintendent Salcido has been a teacher, was a teacher and principal before joining the county education office in 2006, and she worked her way up and served as deputy to former Superintendent Bill Cerrone, who I'll just note served 9 terms. Susan, you have a long way to go. Before she was appointed superintendent by the Board of Education shortly before his retirement in 2017. And the next year she was elected to her own 4-year term with no opposition. This year she's being challenged. She has one challenger, teacher Christy Lozano, who will be our guest next week. So Nick Welsh referred to the county superintendent as, quote, the most important, least understood elected office nobody ever heard of. And Title I, Article 2 of the State Education Code lays down what the duties are, but it's pretty vague. Can you explain what it is the county superintendent does?
Absolutely, glad to. And also might want to throw in how it's different from a district superintendent, because I think that's an area of need for explanation. So let me actually start there. A district superintendent, so Jerry, you know very well, and those who are watching know too, that there's 20 school districts in Santa Barbara County. So Carpinteria has its own school district, Goleta, Santa Barbara Unified. There in Santa Barbara, for example, Hilda Maldonado is the superintendent, and they have a school board. So all the 20 school districts have a district superintendent and a school board. And there, at that local level, they're making decisions around their schools. So for example, curriculum, materials, their goals for their schools, how they're going to spend their funding, the budget. All of those are local decisions, including who they hire, what their salary schedules are. They hire their superintendent, for example. That's part of what a local board does. So then the question is, what does the county do? And what does the county superintendent do? So as you said, there's some constitutional roles that we play, but I'd like to explain it in 3 categories. So one category is direct student supports. So you might think, just like a school district, they support students, and so does the county office, but it's in a very special category. So the category are really in 3 parts. 1, students with special needs. So we have a very large special education division, and our staff, my staff, are serving within schools for students with disabilities from Cuyama all the way down to Montecito. So that's one area of direct student support. Another one is we operate preschools. So my staff are operating 10 preschools within Santa Barbara County for low-income families. And then a third one that I think is very commonly known for county education offices around the state are serving students who are adjudicated youth. So those in the Santa Maria Juvenile Justice Center, Los Prietos Boys Camp at Los Robles High School. That's my principal, our team, our staff who are serving students. So as I said, 3 categories, that's one, direct student support. Another category, and I'll put it over here, is more in that governmental zone. So like a governmental agency, they're saying, what do you all do as a governmental agency? Well, that is that the California Department of Education, there's one. And in California, there are over 1,000 school districts and over 1,200 charter schools. So rather than the CDE disseminating information and providing support to all of those districts and charter schools, they asked the 58 county superintendents in our offices to be the liaison between the CDE, California Department of Education, and our school districts and charter schools. And that is something we saw as evidenced by the pandemic. So much information coming from the California Department of Public Health. We were providing that information onto our school districts as an example. But it goes both ways. We also advocate on behalf of the schools and districts and charter schools right back up to Sacramento. So that's a really important role in terms of that second category. So direct supports, support as a liaison, and then right in the middle, I'll say that's really that supplemental support. So we are, for example, 500 teachers come through SBCEO to clear their teaching credentials. So breaking it down, we have great universities in Santa Barbara County, Westmont, UCSB, Cal State Channel Islands, Cal Poly supports us. There's so many, I won't list them all. But when an individual goes to college to get a teaching credential, they actually don't complete it. They actually complete it through organizations like mine. And so we're supporting that supplemental service of teacher credentialing as an example. Another example may be professional development. The latest content standard that the state has adopted is in computer science. So it's a standard like English, math, science, and then now there's computer science. So our team will provide professional development. So we come alongside our districts and provide that supplemental support. You'll also hear examples of student events, Battle of the Books and the Spelling Bees, and all of these great teacher recognitions. That's part of that middle category of coming alongside of our districts and providing that support. So those are those three categories.
Well, that was very clear. Thank you. That's much better than Cerrone ever did. So I give you props on that. So given that brief and those responsibilities and duties that you have, why do you deserve re-election? What have you done in that context over the last 5 years that should make people, voters, rehire you?
Yeah, I really do hope our voters will rehire me because I have work I'd love to do on behalf of our students and districts in Santa Barbara County. Some of the work that requires experience, or I should say, the work that we do at the county education office and the work that I do in those three categories really requires experience and understanding of complex systems. So an example of that is something that I didn't share, is that something that we do at the county education office is receive all of those district budgets from all 20 districts and charter schools. We review and approve them for solvency. We've got to have that experience in order to do that. We're working with complex systems of goals and accountability, and our team works with all of our school districts to review and approve those. But that's some of the technical work that we do. I mean, what I'm looking at is when I am seeing our schools and our students and our teachers who've gone through all that we've gone through in the last 4 years, we're at a place where we really need to provide strategic support. And I'm talking about the mental wellness of our children and families. That's an area where I said just a few years ago, let's go for that statewide grant so that we can provide school-based mental wellness supports in our schools. And we received it. It's the first time ever that the county education office, in conjunction with the behavioral wellness, Santa Barbara County Behavioral Wellness, came together to provide those kinds of supports. And we want to and will be expanding those supports throughout Santa Barbara County. We started in North County in Santa Maria, and we're making our way down to the Central Coast. That's an example of saying we need to identify what's really needed, know what the systems in the state are so that we can go for those grants, and then partner with regional partners in Santa Barbara County and provide them for our schools on behalf of our students. as an example. Another example that I'm really excited about, actually, I really believe that our students in our schools, when they wake up to go to school every day, we want them to be motivated for something that really sparks their attention. I mean, for many students, it's going to school. It's exciting just to go there, be with their friends, be with their teachers. But I think for success for our students, we need to really be thinking about what's going to motivate them for their livelihood, careers, futures. And again, another opportunity we've had, my staff has gone for and received and acquired career technical education grants. And we've provided those out into our schools, over $6 million over the last 4 years, so that they can provide career pathways for our students in our middle schools and high schools. So those are some examples of really understanding the statewide system of resources, understanding what our needs are and gaps are within our schools, and how to use our team to acquire some resources to provide them right out into our schools again.
How many employees work for the county the Department of Education?
We employ 550. That's something that some folks will make an assumption. You must be the boss of all of the teachers and staff within all the school districts. And of course, we talked about that before. Those are the employees of the districts. But for us, we have about 550 that work for us, and that's in special education, preschool programs, and all of those different grant areas that I was talking to you about.
And as I reviewed the budget documents to the extent I could, it looks like the budget's about $100 million for the whole operation, including the County School Service Fund, the Child Development Fund, and the Capital Fund.
Right.
Exclusive of those 20 districts that you've talked about. That's a lot of money. So why can't kids in Santa Barbara read?
So that is a lot of money. Let's go there. So about a third of that budget goes into that early childhood education supports and provides actually subsidy grants for families to acquire spots into child care and early education, or early care and education, which is great. A third is about special education and all of our services countywide. We serve over 700 students in special education, and the other third are for all of the other operations, grants, supports, and services. So you jump from, and then you said exclusive of the districts and their budgets. Absolutely. So now let's go into reading.
Well, let me just offer some context.
Sure.
The California Assessment of Student Performance and Progress, or Casp, which has to be the worst acronym ever. The most recent results showed that for Santa Barbara County, only 46.5% of students met or exceeded grade level in language arts, and only 33.7% in math. And of course, those numbers are worse for Latino and Black students. I mean, we're not succeeding here, are we?
You know, that's a really important question. I want to unpack it a little bit, and I want to be real about CASP exams and tests. In the last 2 years, and that's where we're getting those results back from the last couple of years, we have to remember we were in a situation that is absolutely abnormal. Hopefully, let's knock on wood, never happen again. It was not all schools were even taking the CASP exams. So it's a reflection of a time that was absolutely abnormal. Having said that, I don't want to dismiss.
I mean, there's not really a category difference for how we were doing before the pandemic in terms of those scores, correct?
Well, we can look back and historically around the results of students, but in literacy and in mathematics and in science. But I want to say those are one point in time exams. They're happening right now in our schools, for example. They're multiple days long. Students opt to take them, or parents will opt them in or out to take them. And it is an indication, but it isn't everything. And I think it's really important that we frame that we frame or reframe students and their learning to say, let's not use a sweeping generalization of they are failing or teachers are failing or schools are failing. I think it's really important to say, let's think about our classrooms. Let's go back for a minute, and I won't go too far down a bird walk here, but when a 4-year-old or a 5-year-old is going into kindergarten, for example, they usually have a pre-assessment. This isn't an annual test, it's a pre-assessment. The teacher is asking, can you write your name? Can you identify numbers? How about colors? That assessment is to inform the teacher on, okay, I'm getting 20 students in my class. Let me see how I can individualize their learning. That assessment isn't that student's failing or that parent failed because they didn't help with the colors, or it's not about the failure. It's about, okay, how do we support each of those students for success? And it's a daily assessment. That's what teachers are doing in our classrooms. And it's daily for the elementary, of course, and all day long for different periods for the secondary teachers. I mean, that's what's important, is the assessments that say, how are our students doing? How can I change my teaching and practices? The once a year assessments they provide us with information. They're typically sweeping generalizations. We need to unpack that data to say, which are the groups and which are the grades and which are the identified needs. That's really what needs to happen in that area. But it's really, really important that we individualize instruction. That's what the sophisticated profession of teaching is all about, is to see how are our students doing in my class on this subject, on this unit, and then understand how we can progress and support. But, I'd say that literacy and reading, mathematics, essential. We absolutely need to focus there.
Yeah, I know. And you've used the word success several times. And, when we try to measure success, I mean, that's always something that you're asked to do in business. That's the metric that we have. And if over half of the students aren't reading at grade level and 2/3 can't do math at grade level, that doesn't sound like success.
Right. It sure doesn't. And I definitely want to say it is absolutely these subject areas that you've noted are essential. We have to have our students reading and communicating with math and calculating mathematics. Absolutely. The test scores are an indicator, but we really need to work on the skills within the classrooms, that kindergarten, first grade, second grade, third grade levels are so, so important. To have students struggling in these areas in 4th grade, 5th grade, the gaps get wider and wider. So I'm agreeing with you in that we need to focus our supports in these areas. When I speak to, I went recently to the Mark Richardson Career Technical Education Agriculture Center in the Santa Maria Joint Union School District. It's phenomenal, brand new, state-of-the-art vocational school for their high schools. It's incredible. And one of the teachers who teaches it in college, but then comes to the high school as well to teach, and this is in the machine shop and in the construction shop and in the engine shop, talked about, we asked him, okay, we know that this is the course, it motivates students to come every day. Tell us what we need to do in elementary school so that students can be ready for your class here in high school. And he said the number one thing that he noticed that needs to be taught is mathematics. He said what happens is, he was talking about blueprints and reading blueprints to construct houses and tiny houses and things like that. And he said when you make the learning real, so for example, a drill bit, from fractions to decimals. You need a decimal and then turn it into a fraction to understand what drill bit you'll need. He said when students really understand the practical need for learning, that's when they the light bulb clicks. And so all of us, we're talking about tests and test scores. These are important indicators. I think it's really important that students are absolutely motivated. They know why they're learning what they're needing to learn. They're applying, they're going to need to apply it for the real world. I mean, that's what we need to do in terms of preparing our students in our classrooms every day.
All right, fair enough. I want to go back to, you talked a little bit about COVID and the impact, and there's been a lot of commentary about whether we should have closed the schools or not, and I don't want to relitigate that. But as I understand it, there's no question that there has been significant, measurable learning loss as a result of COVID. Say a word, if you will, about how serious a problem that is on top of the chronic learning problems that we've already discussed. And what are you doing about it?
That's a great question. When schools reopened, and they reopened in different spaces, times, it was very, very different across the county. What we noticed, first of all, what was noticed were, frankly, what I was hearing mostly was the behavioral shifts of our students. And I'll get to the academics in a moment. But what happened was, after being away from an in-school environment, students actually needed to learn again what it was like to be in person, and behaviors were really, really challenging, to where we had to learn again how to go from class to classroom. How do you communicate in a classroom with others? It was a really huge, something that I think we didn't expect, but needed to address, is those behavioral shifts that needed to occur. And then, of course, the learning. I mean, hand in hand. And so what's happening is what needs to happen, which is that individualized support. So there's tutoring after school, for example, really targeted supports for after school, before school. We're really wanting to build on what we call community schools. We've used community schools in the past in education to be more like a alternative school program. But right now we're shifting to using the language of community schools so that we can have more resources at schools to support that, what you've been calling the learning loss. We really need to have more. We've lost time. The online environment, while it worked for some, was very challenging for many or most. And so now we need to make up that time. So you're going to see more summer school offerings, longer school days that aren't required or mandatory, but they're after school. Those are the ways in which we're addressing supports for students that are going back and helping to accelerate learning. So there are some, I've spoken with, oh, go ahead, excuse me.
Well, I want to just drill down on this a little bit. I mean, there's that old saw that you learn to read until the third grade and then read to learn afterwards. And, just reading the coverage of this, it seems like, it's most serious and significant in the grade 3 group, in kindergarten, first and second grade, where they're supposed to kind of get the building blocks of reading. So is there some special approach for that?
I don't know. I have to say, so I spoke with several kindergarten teachers last year and the year before. And what they were proud of was, they said that even with Zoom school, they were able to teach their children in their schools, multiple different schools across the county, their children learn to read. So that was a plus. Having said that, we want to do more than the basic reading. We want to do really that love of learning. I heard from a parent just last week who said her daughter is now in second grade, so had kindergarten and first grade really interrupted by COVID. And she said, it was really challenging because she has an older child who by first grade was reading. But her second child, who had gone through kindergarten, first grade in this period, was a slower reader in second grade. She had concerns when schools opened up again. And she said, I just want you to know that now that we're in the spring, she's really caught up. So there's this period of time of significant concern, but now that schools have been open, they've been doing all they can to make up for that time and accelerate their learning. In terms of something special, you said, is there something special that we're doing? And I'm going to say that the special piece is to really focus in as school systems across California, but in Santa Barbara County, to say, all right, superintendents, school leaders, how are we going to support our students in extra ways? And that's really what we're focused on. There's expanded learning opportunity grants, really. There's extra funding for after school supports. And it's not just only playtime or extracurricular after school supports. We're talking about focused literacy support, tutors that are trained in support for students in mathematics specifically, or literacy specifically. We really are focused as a school system around extended learning opportunities for students specifically for this purpose.
All right. Let me ask you about a couple other things that have emerged post-COVID. I don't know if it's causation or just a coincidence, but the enrollment is down. Is that correct?
That is correct.
How much?
You know, by last report, I had a report around 200 in Santa Barbara County, but I don't know that that's accurate. So I need to check again. I think it might be more than that.
Okay.
But I need to check on that number.
And chronic absenteeism is way up.
It's
correct?
way
Across the board?
It is.
How do you account for that?
Well, I think in terms of the attendance rates, decreasing, I'm reading the headlines as you're reading the headlines, and I'm across California. I'm also speaking with our superintendents about the shifts in attendance, and there's unknown information and then there's known information. We know that in public schools, many families chose to have their children attend private schools. The charter schools, which are public schools, their numbers increased as well. People moved out of California and out of the districts. And we don't have great tracking for when they move out of a district. Once they move out, we don't always aren't able to track from state to state. So there's some unknown data as well. And then chronic absenteeism, I think the rates for COVID, people were not wanting to report that they had COVID, so they aren't reporting attendances. I think that is a bit bumpy as to an explanation there. We need to look more into what were the reasons for additional chronic absenteeism. That's something we do track. We have great partnership with the district attorney's office as well with the truancy program. That's something we can circle back and get more information about.
And additionally, we are having now a teacher shortage and specifically special needs teachers?
Jerry, I am so concerned about the teacher shortage and the staffing shortage in our schools, because everything that we spoke about before, and hopefully we will, about what work we have done, are doing, want to do for our students, you have to have staff to do it. Every sector that I don't want to generalize, but I've heard from so many sectors that they also have shortages. But in teaching and in special education, it is incredible. Can
you quantify it?
One district expressed that they had 150 not teaching positions, but staff positions left unfilled.
Including teachers.
We have, and going back to SBCEO, so Santa Barbara County Education Office, and of course the students we support. So let me just go there for a moment. In special education, for example, we need individuals, for example, to interpret, ASL interpreters for students in their classes every day. We have not been able to fill this position for so long. We need multiple of these. This is California-wide, but it's absolutely county-wide, and it's absolutely for our own staff as well. So it is an an area of significant concern. And a concern I want to link to that is, we talked earlier about schools have all this money. What are you all doing? Okay, and that was such a great question. We have the money to hire individuals. We need the individuals to hire in order to make a difference in our schools. It's a bit of a catch-22 right here, because we need to have people that are trained and qualified to support our students, and we are lacking significantly. And in an area of mental wealth support and mental wellness support.
What about salaries? Why don't you throw some of this extra money at salaries?
That's a consideration that is getting national attention. And that's what folks are going to start looking at, is stipends for individuals, especially very, very hard to fill positions. So there'll be stipends. There's going to be looks at salaries. I mean, all of that is really, really important. We've got to do that now because our supports are needed now.
Yeah, I mean, I can only imagine the morale of teachers. I mean, you know, having gone through the last two years, done their best, then everybody shows up at the school boards and beats them up. And, you know, what are you doing about teacher morale?
It is an absolute reality around teacher morale and concern. You know, we've been through a lot, Jerry, in the education system. Like it or not, we've been through a lot in the education system. And our teachers, when we first were on Zoom, boy, they got a lot of credit. You heard families and celebrities were coming out and saying, oh, these teachers are heroes. And right now, they're fatigued. They are expected to do so much more than in their classroom. And they've become COVID monitors, and they're supporting their students and their emotions as well. The criticisms that we're hearing about, quote, failing schools that we just talked about a moment ago, and what are you all doing in? I mean, that framing is really, really challenging for teacher morale. And let's hook it back to the need for more staff. We need to have more staff that are highly qualified, that are excellent individuals and instructional staff for our students. Is this the environment right now that individuals want to come into, that they want to enter into? So I'm really grateful for our teacher education preparation programs out there who are really helping to motivate individuals to come into our profession, because the morale right now is something that is tender. And I'm really, really mindful of that. And one small way we can help. And I think some people might minimize this, but I want to say, let's illuminate this. These teacher recognitions and celebrations, the Teacher of the Year, the Performing Arts Teacher of the Year that we'll be naming soon, Crystal Apple. These are ways in which we can recognize these individuals for their incredible professionalism, their hard work, their heart, and all that they're doing. It is absolutely an area for us to focus and be mindful of, and why it's important for us to absolutely acknowledge the work that needs to be done, not shy away from it, say absolutely literacy, literacy, mathematics, all of the supports we were talking about, absolutely need to point to it. But we also need to support our teachers in doing it really, really well, and acknowledge that morale is sensitive and that the shortage is real.
All right. Let me ask you one more sort of post-COVID question. You touched on it earlier, mental health issues among kids. And, you know, we've read a lot about suicide rates being up, depression, anxiety, and so on. Can you put a frame on what that looks like pre-COVID, post-COVID, and what resources are being thrown at that?
Absolutely. So anecdotally, so I've heard from individuals anecdotally, I don't have the scientific data yet, but I think we'll have that soon. I'm hearing from counselors at schools across the county that their referrals from teachers for mental wellness supports for their students has in many cases doubled. So there's just double referrals happening. The issue is, coupled with that, is that we need to have places for the students and the families to go. And so when I talk to the psychologists and support people and, external providers like Calm and, FSA, Family Services Agencies, they are booked. They have many, many individuals on a waiting list so that they can serve these students really well. So it's a traffic jam. The need is high. These individuals want to provide service, but they too are having a staffing shortage. I was just on a call with behavioral wellness, and they're talking about in their sector, support sector, again, staffing shortages are absolutely real. So what's happening is a mismatch, high needs, not enough services, and it's countywide. So here's what we're doing about it. You asked about, so what do we do about it? I want to lift up an organization called YouthWell, and that's a relatively new organization. And it's a neutral organization in that what they want, it's not a provider themselves. It's bringing the providers to the table from across the county so that the schools can know where to refer students to, and to be able to be really explicit about who has space and who doesn't have space to take in more families. I think what happens when we break it down and you think about a family, and I've had this happen to me, and you may have had this happen to you, where a family friend or a neighbor will come over and say, this individual youngster is struggling. I don't know where to refer them. We've tried school, we've tried, all of these different outlets. I think what's important is, in a county of our size, Santa Barbara County, I think we can do this so well. And that is to identify what are the supports for behavioral, for mental health and wellness in Santa Barbara County, who has availability, and let's ensure that students and families, and honestly, teachers and staff can have that support. And so one of the things that you're going to hear about more and more, and I'm sure you already have, is the importance of what they call navigators. And so the navigators are people who help, it sounds obvious now, but to help a family or a student or a staff person navigate to a place so they can get some supports. And those are for people with insurance, not insurance, no insurance. I mean, we really need to support our students, their families, and even teachers and staff who are really coming to their everyday. Not everybody, I don't want to categorize everybody in this way, but there are heightened emotions, depression, stress, isolation. This is really getting in the way of academic focus and work on what we think of traditionally as schooling.
All right, I want to spend just a couple minutes on reading and literacy, and we've talked a little bit about it, but do county schools screen for dyslexia before third grade? Yes, no, and if not, why not?
Excuse me. So our county schools, the juvenile court and community schools, we screen as students come in. So that's our screening for our own students. And I say that because what we're saying is we don't screen for the schools and school districts. That's for schools and school districts to do for their students. So the county schools, our screening is for our students in our juvenile court and community schools. So wanted to just make that differentiation.
Do you have a sense of how many districts are or are not screening?
Specifically for dyslexia?
Yes.
Yeah. I will need to go back and check on that with our curriculum and instruction team. But I can say that I think we need to do screening for dyslexia for our students as part of the screening that we do for literacy and learning. I think it's really, really important that we do that.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of states do it as a matter of state law, and California does not. It's really up to the local districts, but it just seems so important when we talk about literacy. I mean, you just find students who are dyslexic kind of faking their way through it, and it takes a long time to discover at some points.
Excuse me, sorry. Just want to say that your specific question around how many districts screen for dyslexia, that's when I do need to go back and really get an accurate response for. But I will say too that there are my own team. We're receiving training in dyslexia screening so that we can advise our districts. So that is happening right now. Our special education local plan assessment, it's a different entity. They're actually receiving training on dyslexia screening so that they can support districts as well. And our districts, so many of our districts are actually receiving that training for their professional development for teachers. Having said that, I want to acknowledge the importance of it, that we need to have it, but that right now it's individualized across the districts, and not all districts are elementary school districts. So I want to acknowledge that there's some districts of ours in Santa Barbara County that are only high school, for example. Doesn't mean they shouldn't have it, but we were talking about those early years. Right. So I just wanted to clarify some of my statements there.
All right. And I don't want to get too in the weeds here, but as I understand it, there's, and this is a complete oversimplification, but there's this debate, I guess, between the best way to teach reading, between the balanced literacy method and the science of reading, which relies heavily on phonetics. And it seems that, or at least in Santa Barbara Unified, which is the district I know most about, the balanced literacy method is what's used rather than a more phonomic approach. Why is that? And isn't the science really showing that the science of reading method is more effective?
So let's go with the why is that, and back to expressing, just for pure clarification, that curriculum decisions, instructional models are all decided upon by a school district. And so Santa Barbara School District will have implemented their approaches to reading and literacy different from, say, Cuyama. They'll have their own approach. And so it's difficult for me to say, I really cannot say why they chose what they chose, but I can say that statewide and including countywide, we're really looking at literacy in a different way. We really want to say, okay, what are the different approaches there are? What are the ones that are most successful? And let's really dig into that learning and work with experts in the field of literacy, and then implement that and actually support the implementation of that with school districts. So it's not that the county office would say, here's how you all have to do it. That's just not our role. That is just absolutely usurping a local school board's role. But what we can do is say, here are the methods that we know from the statewide research, the research we've done that can support your district as you're thinking about implementation of literacy and reading in your district. Methods have changed over the years, and we have about 6 to 7 support staff at SBCEO that work very, very specifically with literacy from, and I don't want to oversimplify this either, but from computer literacy to the reading techniques to dual language support in literacy to content level literacy for science, which is different from social studies, which is different from mathematics. All of that is something our team works on in our curriculum instruction division. And we work alongside districts who say, come alongside, they'll request our services, and we work with them around literacy supports. But it really is, Jerry, it really is dependent upon each district and what their approach they adopt.
You know, another issue I've heard a lot of parents talking about recently is the issue of screen time. And, you know, obviously with Zoom, kids are on screen all day. Kids are on screens anyway, looking at you know, movies and playing games and doing all sorts of other things. And then we have, you know, some districts which, and not to, you know, sort of short the generosity, but, you know, everybody gets an iPad. And so they're learning, particularly, again, this early you know, third grade and before group is on a screen. They're doing a lot of reading on a screen. Talk a little bit just about your perspective on that whole issue of screen time and whether you think iPad assisted learning in the early grades is a good thing or a bad thing.
Yeah, thank you for that question. And I'm going to say this is a sensitive topic for a lot of families, really, because I think what's happening is we're experiencing way more screen time at home than we even want to admit in terms of our children being on screens. And I think what has happened is, and I speak for myself included, I have two kids at home, and, you know, we have our parameters around being on the screen, but it is hard. It's so tempting. The students and youth are so tempted into being online, being screen time, social media. So to your question, we were so reliant on it 2 years ago. Everyone had to have these devices. And then we talked about connectivity as a utility, just like water and electricity. I mean, there was such a focus on it, and it was celebrated. We have connectivity, we have devices. And so now we insisted our students, kindergarten all the way up, use devices all day. I mean, we were saying that's what you have to do. And now we're at a place of, wow, there's a lot of extra screen time. And not only is it screen time, but I want to go into what we see and don't see as parents and guardians of individuals who are using the screen. So in other words, I think there's a real, not every parent can sit right next to their child while they're on the screen all day. Oftentimes what will happen is the screen's over there and the family's over here, so it's not being monitored carefully. And I say that without, again, not generalizing, and I don't want to accuse anybody, but what I'm saying is what is on TikTok now, and what's on Instagram now, and what's on social media in Snapchat are things that aren't necessarily visible to all of our parents and guardians. And I think that's an area where we've got to really, really watch. I think I've gone down a different path. You were talking about what we're going to do with screen time, but I took it to social media and really having an understanding of what our children are seeing and viewing, being asked. It's a very different environment. If I can go into, when you're ready, I want to talk about fentanyl and drug use, and that is an area of crisis right now in the nation, in the state, and in Santa Barbara County. And I know for sure that ways in which youth are enticed are through those social media modalities that we're not always on. Some of the grownups were on, Facebook. Children, youth, they're not there. And so we've got to be really, really careful about the screen time for sure, but also what is being watched and what kind of social media inputs there are from the external for our youth.
Well, talk about fentanyl a little bit, about drugs. I mean, how has that changed in recent years?
Significantly, and it's an absolute crisis of which we need to focus as a community. And this is an area where I think that having a broad understanding of the resources around the county are so important in schools, but also in many different sectors. So an example of this is yesterday, all credit to Sheriff Bill Brown, who facilitated a second meeting. And there were about 40, 50 individuals, from faith-based leaders to civic leaders to elected officials, the education community, parents, they're all in a room. And we were looking at the increase of deaths related to fentanyl. And it's not just focused on youth. It's for senior, it happens to seniors as well. I mean, it's a really problematic drug that individuals, once they use it one time, can die. And so we've got to be really, really careful about that. To me, it's important that we educate. It's really about educating our school people, because I've already spoken with our superintendents to speak about, let's get this education to our school folks, really to our parents, to our community members. And that's an area of focus that we really need to be looking at quickly. It's, like I said, it's something that we can prevent. And there's so many, I didn't say the medical professionals who were in the room, but there were many, and so many services around Santa Barbara County. The concern is so heightened that it's really gone to first place for many of our individuals in the county around support for lives and fentanyl. It's a real crisis that we need to focus on right now.
All right, you've been so generous with your time, and I've kept you past what I promised. But I real quickly, just a couple of things. One of the really awful things about the pandemic was the way it became so politicized, and specifically on the issues of masks and vaccines. And we really saw a lot of pushback on both those things, and polarization like we see elsewhere. And one of the ways it's manifest that I've seen is just kind of the, abuse and threats and other things that are kind of aimed at the school board members throughout the county, who, they're out there doing the Lord's work for 12 cents an hour, and gotta do all this. What's your perspective on that? How have you viewed that, and what can be done? I mean, it's going to discourage good people from running.
You're absolutely right, Jerry. This is not the time for this politicization in education, the divisiveness. We're seeing it, we're feeling it, we're hearing it, we're experiencing it. There were families who were genuinely concerned about the masks and vaccines. I completely understand that. I hear that. I hear it. I listen to it. I understand that they're concerned. It's gone beyond that. There is a political agenda that's getting pushed into races and in elections, like county superintendent of schools.
Do you think that's happening in your race? Is that what your opponent is about?
I will say that I'm about bringing folks together. I mean, really, this is the time. We have been through such crisis. We need to do all of the work in the areas we talked about today. Fentanyl was the most recent one. Staff morale, staff building, increasing staff support. We do that through working together as a community. Our county, Santa Barbara County, is the right size, with the right people, with the right leaders, with the right teams to work and move forward this agenda. It is not the time for a national push playbook on agendas that have nothing to do with collaboration and working towards something actionable to support our students. So I wanted to say all of that because you were talking about the fact that there's a push on school board members. We're seeing that within our own county, in our own neighborhoods. That needs to end. We need to build bridges, work together. If we could show all of the students, 70,000 plus in our county, that we as adults can come together, if we could harness all of that energy and put it towards focusing that support on students, I mean, we would be in such a better place. I really believe we can do it. I know that we can do it going forward. We're in a place where schools are open right now. We need to roll up our sleeves and work in different ways. And that can be done in Santa Barbara County in our schools. We cannot have that national playbook push in these aggressive agendas in our schools. We need to focus on students, on teachers, on parents, listening to their voices and making really good decisions so that our students can be, as we talked about, successful.
All right, well, let's leave it there. I got a million more questions, but I've already imposed on your time. Susan Salcido, thank you so much for being with us and for talking about these difficult issues. The superintendent will be on the ballot in the June primary, along with Christy Lozano, who will be our guest next week, and we'll talk about these issues again. Susan Salcido, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much.